everybody, and welcome to the bonus video in the King and Pawn Endings series. I hope everyone enjoyed our 5-part lecture series, and hopefully you are now a King and Pawn Ending stud muffin. You can solve anything, right? No King and Pawn Ending is too difficult for you. You apply the principles perfectly, you recognize the patterns, and you always calculate things to the end. This is a famous position between Yasser Seirawan and Garry Kasparov, 1983. On this position is Yasser Seirawan to move. He's white. And Garry Kasparov obviously has a better position of the king, also is dealing with a full hand here, protected pass pawn on b4. And as I've said before, in king and pawn endings, outside of a material advantage, a protected pass pawn is about as good as it gets. White was unable to make any sort of trade, as that would easily lead to a loss. Black would take the pawn and take everybody else, and white is completely stuck. And so Seirawan played the move f5, which is the best move here, actually the only move. And again, to highlight the value of a protected pass pawn, this king could wander all the way over here, to Timbuktu, and it wouldn't make a difference. White's inability to make progress is based on the fact, we'll just do it for fun, that in a protected pass pawn, which is not a pass pawn that's randomly protected by a piece, the term is used for a pawn protected by a pawn, right? The king can never release the anchor. He can never get rid of it, but he can also never leave it outside of the box, right? Outside of our famous king and pawn ending box, the king can never leave. So making some other sort of journey or trying to trade and create a pass pawn of his own is always out of the question. As soon as the king has left the box, the pawn runs and becomes a queen. So after f5, Kasparov knows he's better, and obviously Seirawan knows that he's in trouble. But the tricky thing about this position is how to make progress, okay? Your job at this point, before we talk about what Kasparov did here, as far as the direct line that he used to win, is to pause the video and try to find it yourself. Again, like the advice we gave in the fifth video, the final stage, was to try to apply yourself before you just let the information be spoon-fed to you. How does black win this position? So you can go ahead and pause the video. And you're back. So the most direct line, and the line you have to calculate first. Okay, if you didn't calculate this and you already immediately took, the clue I gave in the beginning of the position using that word triangulation as a get out of jail free card not to calculate, well, you're wrong. Okay, you have to calculate the most concrete lines and the most direct ways to win, because if it's a win, principles go out the window, generalizations go out the window if you can calculate a direct line. So the most typical and direct line to win a king and pawn ending is usually this decoy method of sacrificing this pawn so that the black king can come over here and start munching and perhaps get a queen. So we have to calculate that line. Let's do it. b3, b3 for black, king to c3, b2, king takes b2, king to d4, king to b3, king takes e4, king to c4, king takes f5, king to b5, king moves, not to b5, by the way, as that would be a potential blunder, queening on the diagonal, never forget that. But after king b6, we get f5, a5, f4, a6, f3, a7, f2, a8, queen, so white actually queens first, f1, queen. Despite the fact that black will likely pick up this pawn on h4, the position is a draw. Even if black had been queening first and then white had queened second, the position would still remain a draw, based on the fact that one outside pass pawn with two queens on the board, one extra pawn like a corner pawn, especially when it's not advanced, is going to give you pretty much zero winning chances because of your inability to avoid a perpetual check with the queens on the board. Do you want to see it? Let's see it. Right? For our more intermediate players, not quite as advanced, we will make the move so that you can see the line in your head. Although I always suggest, of course, that visualization. Okay, so I was wrong about that line. Okay, so obviously I miscalculated. I knew that was wrong because I knew that white actually queen second. So I just, rambling, I missed up the tempi. But like I said, that's why I made the point. I gave myself a little, get out of jail free card myself, pointing out that even if black was queening first and taking this pawn, this position is going to be an easy draw. White will be able to get a perpetual check. So after f5, you should look at b3. You have to look at b3. You're morally required as a chess player to calculate the most concrete lines as far as the eye can see, or as far as the mind's eye can see, we'll say. Before you can try to swindle your way to a win, you have to do this. because it also gives, not only does it give you the confidence that, okay, I can't go for that because it doesn't win, and I want to look for something else, but it also gives you the knowledge so that if he ever did mess up, for example, let's say that even just one tempo was different, and somehow we were pushing this pawn, and his king was perhaps winning our pawn on b1 or something, and so he's one tempo behind that whole line. It would be significant to know that, because we already calculated that that line for him is holding barely. To see it one more time, this line is holding by a single tempo, because white queens immediately after black, right? It's holding by a single tempo. So if anything goes wrong, white will lose because of that direct line. So very important to establish those sort of things. That's why you have to calculate concrete lines, even if you don't go for them, okay? Because you want to know why they don't work, just as important. So how does black win this position? Well, the problem is if he could say pass right now, if black could say pass and the position was white to move, the position would be easily winning. We would already have that position I was talking about, where if white moved, black would be up a single tempo because the king would be just a one move short in terms of getting the pawn. And even though he would stop the pawn, black would be ahead of tempo in those long lines we just calculated. You can see that for yourself if you want to pause the video. So a move like king e3 would lose to b3. Any other move, retreating the king, would easily allow the king to come in to d4 and start munching. Okay? So the problem is it's our move. The direct line doesn't win. We have no other moves but king moves. However, our ideal position for the king is on c5. This is triangulation, right? We have to find some way to achieve this exact position with white to move. So the first thing you should consider is a retreating the king. The biggest mistake you could ever make is retreating the b file, by the way. That's the only thing black can do to lose this endgame, is miscalculate a sacrifice for his opponent. Entering the b file would actually lose for black. Just to point that out. So a simple retreat of the king, and maybe we do a little shuffle duffle, right? Little, how's your father? How's it going? Right? Nice to see you. Right? Welcome to the neighborhood. Okay, nobody's doing anything. We're not going anywhere. So a retreat of the king and a shuffle back and forth is not going to gain any kind of opposition or any triangulation. We have an advantage, however, of retreating the king. As we already pointed out, a protected passed pawn gives us that advantage because the king is stuck. You'll often notice that the term, or the tool, as we'll say, the tool of triangulation, which is a tool to gain the opposition, the tool of triangulation is often applied in positions with protected passed pawns, because it only works when your opponent, the enemy king, has less squares than you. The fact that black has so many squares at his disposal, as long as he doesn't blunder to the b file, right? The fact that black has so many squares at his disposal is what allows this technique to work. The fact that white only has a limited number of squares, perhaps, to not only prevent the pawn from pushing, but also prevent this king from coming directly forward. Which is why after the king retreats to either c7 or d7, to point out, either one of these moves, white's only move is king back to d3. He has to be ready to meet king d6 with king to d4, that's corresponding squares for you, and king to c6 with king to c4. The only way for white to play the position. So let's go back to the beginning. After f5, king retreats, we gain the opposition. We already established that the shuffle duffle does nothing. So when black finally figures that out and decides a new try, he can retreat the king and force white back to his original square. If only we had an exception where the king got to move 2 squares one time, we'd be able to pop back to c5, right? And instantly have our goal of achieving that original position except white to move. However, that's not possible. We also know that if we come forward to either one of these squares, he'll simply meet us with opposition, and we're back to the shuffle. So the winning idea is to make another waiting move. By making another waiting move, tongue-tied today, sorry, Kasparov placed white in Zugzwang. If king to c4, black will get the opposition. If king to d4, black will get the opposition. And so the only move seemingly avoiding this is king to e3. However, now by coming back to c6, white doesn't have the square that he needs. He needed that square in order to hold. And so his choices are either king to d4, giving the opposition, and then an easy win. We start pushing and munching, way ahead on time. Or to come to d3 in the original square, hoping that black doesn't come back to this square. We have the same position we were striving for about 6-7 moves ago, with the main difference being it's white to play. Let's see it again from the top. f5, king d6, king d4, king d7, exclamaviach. King back to d3, king to c7. King goes to e3, king to c6, and we've achieved this position by establishing triangulation in one form or another, or like this here, little triangle, Black was able to game the opposition, and Seirawan did not resign. He played king to e3, and Black played b3. And after king to d3, there are two ways to win. One is b2, and after king to c2, king d4, Jobalicious, king up, king takes, king up, we move, king over, we push, king takes, we push, king moves, we push, pawn pushes, we push, we're way ahead. We're queening, he's pushing to a7, and the queen grabs the diagonal, which is an easy way to win whenever there's an outside corner pawn. Keep that technique in mind. I'll show you real quick. Resigns. So we used our triangulation tool. Oops, I'm sorry. We had to go back to D3. Triangulation. Up. Over. We pushed. However, king to D3, Kasparov being Kasparov, decided not to go for that long line that wins easily because he calculated a faster win, which was king to B4, allowing the sacrifice. King to A3. Pawn takes B2. As black queens with check. After F7, B1 queen with check. If king to C2, king to A2, followed by queening with check, and the game is over. So hopefully you see a practical example here of this triangulation method. We love it, right? We love it. We love it. We achieve our goal. Kasparov plays the most accurate win because he's Caspi, and Seirawan resigned in this position. We now move on. A really complex example of distant opposition and flanking and corresponding squares, those three particular concepts. Believe it or not, there is only one move in this position that wins for white. If you want to pause your video and try to calculate here, again, there are three moves by the king. Hopefully no one's considering c5, giving up the pawn. There are three moves by the white king that draw. There is one move that does not blow the win. However, the best idea is actually to simply repeat the position and then go back to this position here where white has a second chance. And there is only one move that wins. Okay? Go ahead and pause your video. The only move that wins in this position is king to g2. Okay? The idea is pretty simple. The idea is that defensive opposition, defensive waiting opposition, your opponent's ability to shuffle. For example, a move like king f2 would be a draw. After, I think, both king f8 and king f6, actually. But no, king f6 is the most direct. The idea is this. The ability to make a waiting move and to make distant opposition work for the defender only works on either a direct file or a direct rank. I learned that, okay? Diagonal opposition does not work for the defender. Something that's really interesting to know, okay? If white makes that mistake and gives black this direct distant opposition, black can actually wait, just to prove the point, he makes another waiting move. Black can actually wait on the direct file here, and white is unable to make progress. Even on king to e4, we have king to e7. If the king comes to f5, black plays king to f7, we repeat. If the king goes to f4, we have both king f6 and king f8 actually draw. If the king goes back to f3, king to f7, the last thing you would want to do is make a mistake like this, giving your opponent opposition and the ability to therefore flank you. Okay. We're going to go back to the beginning because we're already losing it. This position is awesome. The idea is king to g2. Now, what white is going to do, white is going to use the inchworm method. White is going to inch forward like this. But every time I move to the g file, here's what you're going to notice. I'm avoiding a direct line of opposition. After black plays the move king to f6 here, white plays king to f2. Okay? Black is going to go back to e7, and I'm going to go king to g3. Now he sees the direct idea of getting opposition, so he can play king to f7, hoping I make a blunder and he can gain the opposition, so I make a waiting move, regaining the distant opposition. Black has to go back to e7, and after king to g4, it's obvious that king to f7 gives direct opposition. Line would easily lead to a loss based on irregular opposition, as we know. So black plays the move king to f8, and white plays the final exclamation king to f4. Black has two choices. Either go back to the e-file and now allow white to achieve this basic irregular opposition, where if only black could say pass, he would hold forever. However, the fact that he has to move allows white to make progress, even though the kings are never directly opposed in that classical sense there. The king inches its way forward, right? We've seen this example of irregular opposition before. So moving to the e-file allows that idea. Moving to the g-file is perhaps the critical line, and something that I will back up and show you. I think I skipped over one line that has the same idea. White's ultimate idea is actually to wait for this move king to g8, and then apply the ultimate winning method, which you can see doesn't work here. If a move like king e1 is played here, black simply waits. He can even wait here at this point. His whole goal is to make sure that when this square is reached, black can play either king to b8 or king to b6. That's his whole goal. Okay, perhaps I'm wrong that this move, yeah, that move actually doesn't work. He's slow. It shouldn't be sloppy. That allows white to get in. So no, black's idea is to wait on the direct file. So first he waits here. If you go over here, he'll wait. But he's just going to wait on the file, allow you to make progress how you want to. But now just the fact that he's on the same file as you makes you unable to make progress. The fact that you go to the g-file first now allows him to maintain distant opposition, because the ultimate goal of that whole winning line we just gave, the inchworm, is to force him to the g-file when you're on the f-file. That one tempi gives you enough time to apply the winning method we first talked about of coming around to the queen side and achieving opposition because he was unable to reach his goal corresponding square. What's amazing about this position is this. There are corresponding squares all over the board here. Okay? If c3 we have c7. If b4 we have b6, or b8 actually. On e3 we have e7. On f3 we have f7. On g2 we actually have g6. f2 we have f6. g3 we have g7. f4 we have f8. We have all these corresponding squares where depending on whose move it is in that position can be decisive. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but I want to show the line again. King g2, avoiding a direct waiting opposition move. This form of distant opposition where he can wait only works on a direct file or rank. So he enters the f-file, and now we gain the opposition. To show a direct line, anytime black moves to the g-file, I think earlier in the video I showed that this move would lose to something like this, and I was just playing sloppy to show direct opposition. But actually the whole point, to again emphasize the idea I just did, if the king ever enters the g-file before white has gone to the g-file, white will win by coming to the queen side. So black waits. He can make a more aggressive move if he wants. Okay? But actually already by coming here, he's already losing the battle of coming around. And winning the c-pawn will not be relevant. So black has to maintain opposition on the same file. That's his goal. Or he has to maintain closeness to the queen side to constantly prevent white's plan of running around. So let me summarize that again. White avoids direct opposition on a file or a rank, whereas black must either maintain the same file if he possibly can, or he has to maintain some sort of relative closeness to the queen side to prevent white's easily winning plan of running to the queen side. This dynamic, that problem for black, the fact that he has to do two things, prevent white from making progress on this side, but also prevent the runaround plan, is what allows white to make this progress, avoiding the king, gaining distant opposition. We avoid him again, we gain distant opposition. We avoid him one more time, he makes the last strong move, but we still gain the distant opposition. Black's final choice, either enter the g-file and allow the plan, or come back to the e-file and allow this plan we've been using the entire time of avoiding a direct file to finally come into an obvious play where probably most players watching the video can easily see that this is winning, either because you've watched all the videos here or because you're just that good. We already know that this position is a win. Why don't the other ones work? The idea is that if you make that one slip up of allowing him to make a distant waiting move. Let me put it this way. The only reason why this position is winning is because of the dynamic that they are not on the same file right now. And White's ability to make progress by avoiding the same file as enemy king. Let me repeat that. The only reason this is winning is because of the White's dynamic ability to make progress while still avoiding the same file as the enemy king, only entering that file when it gains opposition. I'll prove it to you. After king to e2, I'll play king to e8. And you're like, well, what the heck? The position is so distant. Why can't I make that up? I'll go back to f1. But now I'm going to go to f7. Okay? And if you go to g2, I'm going to go to g6. We have distant opposition. You go to f2, I'll go to f6. So eventually you're like, what the heck? I'll make it. Notice that, by the way, I can come to the g file. Why? Because this little plan of yours of running around, I'm not going to go here and blunder. I'm going to come here. And when you come around, I'll come around. By the way, that's the corresponding square. King d3, king d7. If he goes back here, by the way, this is still a draw. I know it almost seems as though White has made progress, but you haven't. King f4, king f8. King f5, king f7. If king g5, king g7. King g4, king g6. The last try that allowed me to calculate something here that involves an h-file waiting move, thinking, oh, I can trick my opponent into going here because they're all trickster kids, right? Silly rabbits. Tricks are for kids. They stack the pawn and they think they're winning. Only one problem. You're not threatening to gain either the distant opposition or come back around by coming to the h-file. So black actually has this move. Draw. If you go back, I go back. If you go back, I go back. If you go back, I go back. Let's say you try to continue to avoid that. I can go here. Evading me forever on the f-file is going to lead to you-know-what. Oh no, I wish I could have that back. Game over, Red Rover. You're lucky you're even drawing. Check it out again. Slam, jam, oh, not the most accurate. Slam, jam, bam, sham, ma'am, Sam, Shanklin, Kevin, Bacon. I don't know, I'm just saying words, sorry about that. King f4, opposition, and White wins. Making progress by avoiding a direct contact with the enemy king. Are you going to memorize this position overnight? No. Are you going to have it just nailed down and all of a sudden the whole, the clouds just parted and you've just become enlightened? No. But a couple concepts can be taken away from this that will help you. Sorry. One, just that simple advice that when you're calculating some form of distant opposition, if you remember this video, remember an idea, well, I remember that the only way my opponent's ability to maintain distant opposition is based on direct file or direct rank waiting moves, right? If I can avoid that direct contact and still make progress, only entering the same file when I have gained the distant opposition, waiting to grab it if he comes forward any one of those three squares, so he doesn't. Oh, I make progress. Once again, we repeat this pattern. If you can remember that simple concept that your ability to make progress is based on your opponent's inability to wait on the same file as your progress is key, right? And having that ultimate goal in mind, if anybody calculated the direct, some players probably went for this move thinking that you were winning, but either you didn't anticipate the obvious idea of him just waiting for you to come to the square, or you thought it didn't matter and we could always go back. But just that small mistake of entering his file, now he's got you. No matter how you do it, he's got you now. You can go back. He can even go back, actually. He doesn't even have to be aggressive. You can just wait. As long as he's maintaining the file, he's got you when it comes to distant opposition. Very instructive. Something that I really struggled with dictating and managing a distant opposition, because I was like, well, it's very hard to calculate when there are so many multiple waiting moves. So that piece of advice really helped me. I hope it helps you, just being able to see that he actually can't hold distant opposition unless he can get it on a direct file or a rank. So seeing a move like this now actually makes a lot more sense. You're like, oh, I actually do understand this idea, because I'm trying to avoid the direct file but make progress. I understand that my ultimate goal position would be something over here where I can start to force him out, right? Force him out with basic irregular opposition, or coming around but doing it in a way that he can't get opposition. So you have a couple goals in mind, right? And that allows you to make progress without allowing him to achieve his goal, which is to maintain opposition on the same file or rank. Okay. The only move, by the way, that doesn't blow the win, according to my analysis, and you can give this position to the computer forever and they'll think White's winning forever, but the only move that doesn't blow the win, I believe, is king to g1. because it's the only other move besides king to g2. It actually makes sense from a philosophical standpoint, right? It's the only move besides king to g2 that doesn't allow that direct opposition. So now, now both king to f6 allows here, and I believe that this move allowed this. Although, yeah, I think it does. It works out. Even though it's strange, it's further than 3 squares at 5 squares, but it's still distant opposition. Because if king f6, king f2, if king f8, king f2, so he goes back, which is actually his best, and then guess what we have? The same position we started with. So king g1 doesn't win, but it doesn't blow the win, because it's the only move that also avoids it. Any one of these 3 moves allows direct opposition. Though it may be distant, it is direct opposition. Make sure we get that. And king g2 is the only move that actually wins. Okay, well that wraps up our king and pawn ending study. And watching these videos a few times, building your muscles backwards to forwards, right? Start with goal positions, work your way to the most complex situations, hopefully being able to apply the patterns and the ideas that you learned previously. And so hopefully you enjoyed them as well. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.